he has his helpers bring 3 platters of food. The first platter that comes out is a combination of squash and corn, known by the Indian term sagamite. And the chief is very peculiar about this because he approaches Marquette and Joliet and feeds them as if they were children. He picks up the food in his fingers and places them on the lips of the French. The next thing he brings out is the hump of a bison, which is a big mass of very fatty meat, a delicacy among the tribes. Obviously bisons only have a single hump. This is a food that they consider to be particularly delicious. The third platter comes out and the chief announces that it's his best dog.
Oh, God.
The French, it was cooked. And the French are queasy, and Marquette is put in the difficult position of indicating that the French don't eat such things. So they leave the dog behind. Marquette and Joliet get back in their canoes with their voyageurs and they head down the Mississippi River. They make it to what we think is about northeastern Arkansas, where they meet another tribal group, and this tribe says, you don't want to continue down this river because the tribes there downstream are not particularly friendly, and they don't care for the French. So Marquette and Joliet turn around and begin to paddle up the Mississippi River until they reach the confluence with the Illinois. And as they come to this, they make the decision to go up the Illinois River, and Marquette quotes that he has never seen a river like the Illinois River, and goes on to describe in a sort of natural history way about the animals that he sees, including bison and other creatures, the kind of vegetation that characterizes the river. So he's, in a few short words, he distinguishes the Illinois River as being an extraordinary place. One of the other things he notices is there's a painting on that rock wall. If you've been along that stretch of the river, it's a limestone palisade. So from about Alton to Grafton, there is a vertical limestone cliff. And on this cliff, he notices that some of the native people with him are taking their bow and arrow and shooting them at an image that's painted on the wall. And this is a fantastic creature that has antlers of a deer. It has feet with talon. It has a tail which is sort of scaly. And when asked about it, the tribes describe it as the Piasaw, or the underwater monster, the creature of the river that lives. It's an underworld creature that they have to propitiate when they go by, so they shoot arrows at the painting of this. There's a map drawn by a Frenchman named Franklin in 1684, and the cartouche, a little drawing in the lower corner of the map, is of the Piasaw. So that is a rendering that we have of what Franklin thinks Marquette is talking about. As Marquette comes up this river, he doesn't have much to say until he gets to Starved Rock. And when he arrives at Starved Rock, he describes a village there of about 5,000 cabins. And the village he refers to is the Grand Village of the Kaskaskias. So this is another one of the Illinois tribes. So just by his narrative alone, we know that the Illinois are occupying the Mississippi River at the mouth of the Des Moines, 2 of their tribes, the Peoria and the Moingwena. And on the Illinois River, there's another Peoria village and the Grand Village of the Kaskaskia, which are one of the 11 groups that we identify as the Illinois. Marquette is taken by this community and spends some time there, and then back out on to the lakes. They apparently portage across what would be today's south side of Chicago, back into the Great Lakes. They paddle to the east side of Lake Michigan and back up to St. Ignace. Marquette would return to this area in 1675 when he comes back to the Grand Village and creates the first church in Illinois called the Church of the Immaculate Conception. And its purpose obviously is ultimately to Christianize members of the Illinois tribe. Marquette's not well, however, and he has his paddlers take him back toward St. Ignace. He gets to about Benton Harbor, St. Joe, on the eastern or the western side of Michigan, present-day Michigan, and it turns out that he passes there and is laid to rest. In time, the Ottawa would go send some very special people in their community back to the location of Marquette's graves. And their idea is they're called, in the English sense, bone pickers. And they exhume Marquette's remains and clean the skeleton and take Marquette's skeleton back to the upper reaches of the Great Lakes. So this fellow, who had been remarkably instrumental in recording the nature of this place and the first written dialogues of them, is laid to rest someplace on the upper reaches of the lake now. Now, another important Frenchman in the story is René LaSalle, Cavalier de LaSalle. He ends up coming to this stretch of the river in the 1680s to set up an outpost at Starved Rock. He eventually ends up taking his entourage all the way down to the coast of Texas. And their boat founders on the shore of Texas, and it turns out this boat is known as La Belle, and some years ago archaeologists found it, mired down in the mud on the south end of Texas, and it's been excavated. LaSalle decides he has to get back to Illinois, so they begin to walk from Texas back to the Mississippi River. LaSalle is not a very easy guy to get along with. And it turns out that he makes it probably halfway across Arkansas when his comrades decide that LaSalle's going no further. And LaSalle is someplace in the middle of Arkansas. Nobody knows exactly where. His major lieutenant, a man named Henri Jotel, keeps the group together. They get to the Mississippi and they outfit themselves with craft, and they come up this river headed back to Starved Rock. In the part of the story that becomes particularly pertinent to where we're sitting right now is that Jotel and his entourage reached this place, the confluence of the Spoon, the Illinois, and these big backwater lakes. And what's distinctive about their experience is that the vegetation and the mosaic of plants and water here is so confusing that they get lost. And they spend a few days at this place, somewhere in this place, trying to find the main channel of the Illinois River. Now, the Illinois, in its natural state, depending on the particular time of the year, would probably look much like this. It has relatively little flow, it would be still, it would have a good bit of vegetation in it, we can tell from some of the early descriptions. And Jotel and his men paddle around here until they find themselves on the north end of Havana, at a place along what is now called Quiver Beach. And the landmark that becomes important is Jotel writes in his journal that they finally can tell that they're near the channel because they are near a landform they call Du Mamel, in French, the two breasts. And it turns out that today, if you go to the north of Havana on Quiver Road, on the south side of that road, there is an ancient mound, 2,000 years old, that is two mounds conjoined together, that in profile would give Jotel his inspiration to give it its name. So we call them the twin mounds today. We're much more sophisticated than the French were. So we call them twin mounds, and we know virtually nothing about them other than their age. There's some artifacts across the road that we've collected and so on. So these early descriptions of a place like this would be very much like these stands of cattails that we see beside us. And you can imagine paddling into sort of courses of this water and not being able to see out of them and paddling, looking for the current to try to find your way around. From there, Jotel would make his way back up to Starved Rock and eventually onto the Great Lakes. I don't know much more about him in the annals of history, but his contributions to our archaeological knowledge and the sense of this place as landscape turn out to be pretty important. There have been reenactments of these voyages. In 1973, on the 300th year anniversary, some of you who were along the river may have had the opportunity to see a group of people who duplicated that route. I was excavating downstream in Campsville at the time, and they rolled in and spent 2 or 3 days with us, giving us a program about what it was like to paddle every day, the fact that they were consuming enormous amounts of food because they were burning a considerable amount of calories. And then there was a reenactment also of the LaSalle expedition as well along the river. So people have taken to follow those those magnificent, remarkable trips. Now, let me close with this. In 1803, the Illinois decided to enter into a treaty with the United States. And by that time, there are not many Illinois left. Most of them, in fact, are living at a town you should recognize the name of it instantly as the first capital of Illinois, which is Kaskaskia, named after the tribe, because the tribe is sitting there at the mouth of what comes to be known as the Kaskaskia River. When they enter into the treaty, one of the stipulations that's most interesting and very telling about their relationship with the French, and let me digress just with an observation. The estimate is, when the French first arrived, that there may have been 10 to 12,000 members of the Illinois tribe in these 11 language-related, culturally related groups. By the time they signed the last treaty in 1832, the estimate is there are only 400 left. They would become what we know today is the Peoria Indian tribe of Oklahoma. Those are the descendants of the Illinois, all that remain from that once masters of this particular place. The French called this the Illinois country, Pays de Illinois. So when they stipulate in their treaty, at the end of the treaty about the terms, they end up with an annual annuity, they end up with a payment in goods, but they also ask for a particular stipulation, and that is that the United States government builds them a church and gives them a priest, because they have gone to the point in their society that they are now Catholic, of the Catholic faith, and they want to continue to practice that religion. So Marquette and his proteges in the Jesuit order had succeeded in that way. I would note, as a footnote, in one of the biographies of Marquette, one of the things he laments that perhaps you'll understand immediately is that in his efforts to convert, women were much more likely to come to the faith than the men. The men made the argument that they were more interested in Manitou, the creator that many of the tribes recognized. But women evidently saw something in the church, hope, opportunity, that they were more likely to convert to the faith than the men had been. Questions that come to mind? Yes?
Did they die of disease, or what happened to them?
Disease, conflict. I think part of the number is absorbed by then intermarriages into other tribes. What happens is this continues is many of the tribes, for example, a tribe you may or may not have heard of called the Wea. The Wea are living in present-day Indiana. The Piankashaw, another one of the tribes, they are part of this larger Miami, Illinois Confederation, and they end up essentially amalgamating. So the Wea become part of the Illinois. So there's probably some of that occurs, but disease was profoundly challenging. In large part, forebears of European descent were exposed to all sorts of domesticated animals, not the least of which was the horse, and not the least of which was a pox, horse pox, which is smallpox. And so there were immunities built up in the old world, in Europe and Africa and Asia, to these diseases. When Europeans first come to the Americas, the tribes have seen no horses, and they are afflicted very early on. And when you read even the first accounts among the pilgrim communities, the tribes of the Northeast are decimated very rapidly. The tribes, the Tainu, for example, which are occupying the Caribbean, after the Columbian expedition arrives, those tribes suffer mightily as well. And there are very few left when other Spanish come back to the Caribbean to get a sense of it. So loss of life by disease probably has an enormous impact on the tribes. Did we tell you that the paddling back requires questions? You see, if there are no questions, you sit here until I'm satisfied. You could ask me questions other than when's lunch or something like that. Yes.
When they paddle back up and down in Arkansas, how did they miss the Ohio River? It's never mentioned.
I don't know of a mention of it. Surely they saw it. It was the fort? Is it called Fort Defiance? Was Fort Defiance built?
Massive.
No, that's I'm thinking about the confluence of the Ohio. I think just below Cairo, Illinois, is a place that was called Fort Defiance. The fort was built there. Have any of you been to that place? Put this on your list, is your local bucket list. Where the Mississippi and the Illinois River come together is this tiny little sliver of land south of Cairo. And to stand at that point and see these two enormous bodies of water come together is pretty amazing, because the Mississippi is a little muddier. And so you can see these flows of water come together and then essentially become one stream. And the amount of water that's passing you by at that particular point is a staggering place. It's a
How
good
do you
place.
get there? I mean, it's not an island, it's just a
No,
point?
it literally is a point of ground. So drive to Cairo, straight through Cairo, south to the bridge that goes to Kentucky, and there's a park called, I think, Fort Defiance Park, something like that. Not much to see there. Peanut butter jelly sandwich, and there's some rocks at the end. It's a nice place to be.
I had someone describe it when the Europeans arrived here, they found civilization, but they made it a wilderness because of what you were saying about disease. Being wiped out.
It's amazing. There's been a good bit of archaeological work on the upper Missouri River, and there were explorers that had gone up there and seen some of these huge earth lodge villages that may have had 1,500 people. When subsequent explorers go up the river, in fact, when Lewis and Clark come up the river, some of those villages have lost 40% of their population. Jefferson was aware of this, and by then, believe it or not, there was a smallpox vaccine that Lewis and Clark took with them. But the demand was so great that by the time they got to the middle part of the Missouri River, they had already dispensed everything that they had had.